All right. So last time we talked about breaking features into stories, and we had our exercise. And from that exercise, a number of you learned that you actually came up with more features than you did stories, and you also found out why you need to break them down, right? Because then you really haven't mapped out all the work that's going to go in, and that's ultimately what leads to delays and to scope creep, which also leads to delays. So we'll continue that exercise towards the end of class. If there's time, I do have a slightly lengthy lecture today that I want to get through, so bear with me. But it's all important and for your lab. Then we talked about prioritizing product development, and we also talked about the reason for this is that we want to ship consistently, so we have to not only prioritize stories, but we have to make sure there's a process in place and that everybody on our team agrees to that process, but it doesn't have to be set in stone, right? We can change it over time as we add people or as people leave or as the direction of the company changes as well. So, last reminder, basically after tonight I'm not going to accept any more idea summaries, so if you don't get yours in by tonight, then assume that you're on your own. Actually, my slots are all pretty much filled, but Professor Mundell has slots. So if you do sign up, you will get a slot.
How fleshed out do you want the assumption?
So this is really meant to benefit you. So if you don't want to submit something because you're not done with it, then don't submit it because it's not going to be beneficial. I want to look at things that are complete that I can give you advice on, rather than something that's half-baked, and then I'm going to give you something, but you're going to have to go back and redo it. I mean, no matter what, you'll have to redo some of it, but I'd rather see as close to a completed state as possible. So that's not to discourage you from not coming or submitting, but just to convey what it is that I'm looking for. Okay? And if that's going to be your reason to drop out, then don't. Give me something rather than nothing. Okay.
And can we talk about this idea summary during your office hours as well?
Well, I'm not having office hours tomorrow. I'm just having the idea summary.
Or like in future?
Yeah, that's fine too. Yeah, that's fine too. Yeah, I just wanted to have one dedicated evening, afternoon for it. Okay. Actually, the last thing I will. Well, that's fine. Okay. So today, yeah.
Where is
the do hatch?
Yeah.
It's in tier.
Okay.
Do you know where tier is? I'm not trying to be condescending. I'm just saying.
Somewhere, yeah.
It's like the building right next door.
Okay.
So it's the first floor of the building right next door. When you go to Hudson, you go to the next building. If you just walk all the way through the entrance.
This guy's got it.
Okay, past the water fountain. Yeah, it's there. It's all. You'll see. It's all glass doors. So.
That's where office hours are.
It's where the idea session is going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, but is that the place?
Yeah, it's where office hours are. Tier 215. Yes. It's office hours on Wednesdays. You probably get offices on Tuesdays, which are in the CMOS building. So. Okay. Okay.
We'll figure it out.
Fine.
We'll team it.
All right, just Google Map it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about scrappy marketing strategies. And the reason we're putting scrappy in front is because a lot of these strategies are going to be things that you do on a shoestring budget because, after all, you're just getting started. And the ones that I will illustrate are particularly economical, but if you have a bigger budget, then I would encourage you to do more. So we're not going to talk about billboard advertisements and going to trade shows and all of that, but if you've got a budget, then great, you should do that. But to get yourself started, we're going to talk about 3 of these. So the first is SEO, search engine optimization. Second is email. And then the third that we'll touch upon is social media. So I think I've shown this case study before of Food on the Table, where the founders basically initially, to get their early adopters, went out to a grocery store and started harassing customers and managed to get one customer who was a mom, and then she paid $9.95 on each visit. So this was a great way to get the initial customers. But eventually, this is not a strategy to scale the business, right? It's not enough to just go to a grocery store and bombard people. You might want to do some advertising in the grocery store, but we need strategies for marketing that are really going to get the word out about our product. And also, it's not enough to just focus on building a product. It's certainly important, but the other key component to getting adoption, market adoption, is that we need to build awareness. And part of that awareness is going to come from the early adopters. And the other part, is that we don't just want to build awareness with early adopters, but we want to have something which early adopters can go out and tell their friends and their family about, right? So we definitely want to leverage the power of, network effect. So when we're thinking about marketing, remember, I just want to highlight one more time, we're not talking about taking away market share, right? Because that's not what we're capable of doing in that first or second year. We really have to think about how are we going to get market adoption? How are we going to get people to use our product, to spread the word about our product first, and then we can worry about taking market share away from our competitors. So no matter what we do, right, initially we'll have to plant some seeds, and it'll seem like the things that we're doing aren't going to scale, which is fine. So eventually we'll have to run some experiments and then turn things off or run some more experiments. But what we're trying to do is find strategies that are scalable, meaning that, once again, early adopters are going to pick them up, other folks are going to pick them up, but we're really going to be able to reach out to a number of people, with one message or one campaign. And like I mentioned previously, we need to have a multiplying effect. It's got to have network effects. So the one thing I will touch upon, and not a whole lot, I'll leave it up to you all, is figuring out a way to bake in some marketing, bake in some of these multiplier effects into your product. Okay, so this is classically what social networks do really well, because they sort of pull people in, but at the same time, if they don't take off, then nobody hears about them, right? So in your product, think about what it is that you can do to have a multiplying effect, whether it's having a particularly branded experience, whether it's requesting for people to participate and spread the word. Think about how you can have this multiplying effect and to build it into your product features. So the other thing that we want to think about is when we're coming up with these marketing strategies, we don't just want to say, hey, this is great, we're going to do this like the first year and then we're going to throw it away. Right? We want to have strategies that will help us not only grow, but that we can continue to use. Now, I'm not saying that the strategies we come up with that's all that we do, because like I said, you'll certainly pile on more as you have more capital, as you need to explore more channels, but you need to make sure that the initial strategies you've used can still be usable in the future, can still continue to attract folks. So the ones I'm going to talk about today, like I said, the criteria is you've got a shoestring budget, so not a whole lot of money, you need to have early adopters, and you want to put something in that's long-term. And by long-term, I don't mean this is a 10-year strategy. Long-term, I mean a year, 2 years, possibly 5 years out. Now, the thing you have to be careful of is, one of the most precious resources for a startup is time. And so what you don't want to do is expose so many channels or go and run so many experiments that you don't really have the time or the dedication to one particular channel, right? So what I would advocate is instead pick maybe a handful or less channels and then figure out which ones are working and which ones aren't. A lot of times you'll find that it's not even necessarily the channel, but it could be the messaging, or it's the channel itself and people aren't responding. But you can't do that if you've got like 100 things that you're testing. So be cautious about how you allocate your time when it comes to picking the channels that you want to go after. And the other thing is your channels have to basically be a bridge between customers and what it is or where it is that they are hearing about products. Okay, so it's not enough to say, hey, I think I should use email or Twitter or whatever because that's what everyone uses, right? What you want to do is figure out where in particular a customer would hear about a product like yours. Okay, that means that they are going to be an early adopter, and two, it's a highly specialized channel, so they're open to products like yours, meaning you're going to have a greater conversion rate. There's going to be an interest and some intention there. So this comes back to our favorite thing, mental models, right? So when you're doing your interviews, when you're coming up with your customer personas, you should have been asking the question, and if you didn't, now is a great time to go back and ask this question of where it is people are hearing about products. Whether it's particular magazines, whether it's particular social media tools, or if it's influencers or experts, right? All of these things count. And so each one of these are channels, and this is why we have to go back and reference our mental models as well as the customer interviews that we did. So, like I said before, you're still going to do some level of experimentation. It's not just that whatever someone said is going to be where it is you go. You might still have some theories on what you think the most effective channels are. But since this is, of course, a series of experiments, you're going to want to take some measurements on what's working and what isn't. And we'll get into what those measurements are in the analytics lecture. So, like I just mentioned, the investigation of what the channels are needs to happen in the customer interviews. But the other part of it is when you're doing these customer interviews, right, you are not only asking them where they're hearing about the products, but you might also want to ask them some tangential questions, like where would someone who tells you about this product have heard about it? Okay, so try to think in multiple degrees. It's not always sometimes a first-degree connection. Sometimes they hear about products through other people, and those people might hear about it through their favorite blog, their favorite magazine, their favorite TV show, or whatnot. Okay, so it's always important to figure out what the exact source is so that you can focus on that. Now, obviously, I've pointed this out multiple times, obviously your channels are going to change as you're moving through this chasm, right? So as you attract the early adopters, you want to fixate on what are the channels that are going to resonate with them, but then as you move into the mainstream and later on, your channels are going to change, right? You're going to need to do something that's more mass media. Like I said, you might run a TV ad or a Super Bowl ad or any of these things that a lot of people tune in and watch. And so that's for a much later stage. But in the early adopter phase, think about the channels that are unique to those folks. So, like I said before, there's 3 channels that we're going to cover today. We're going to cover social, we're going to cover search, and we're going to cover email, because these are the scrappiest channels. So really, when we think about these 3 channels, what we are doing is called content marketing. Okay? And by that, I mean you're not just putting out tweets or you're not just putting out blog posts. You are educating your potential customers or your audience on what it is your product does, what your company does, and this is why it comes back to understanding your position and understanding the value proposition that you're trying to propose to your early adopters. So a lot of the content marketing has to come from that, which is why you have to be clear about it. You can slice and dice it a number of ways, right? You can do a case study, you can showcase something that your product does, but it all has to be within the context of the value proposition. Okay. So one of the easiest ways to do content marketing is storytelling. Okay? And the reason that storytelling is so powerful is because stories make things relatable. Okay? We talked about this a little bit when I mentioned, thinking about getting some customer case studies. So this is why, because people will relate to the exact customer that you showcase. The other thing is that a story, we've all read various stories in our youth, right? Always captures some sort of moral or some sort of value. And when you do that, then people understand what your values are, what your product's values are. And once again, this is easily understandable. The third thing, the reason that storytelling is so powerful is that a lot of times, depending on how we craft our stories, they can be repeatable, right? Someone will read it and say, hey, so-and-so is building this website for, I just read in the New York Times, somebody's building an art website, and they happen to encourage all these children to get interested in art. And then that will, continue to spread. So making it repeatable, right? Or making it even super specific, like, oh, I read about this 9-year-old John who's all of a sudden really into art, right? So this is what captures people's attention. It's the sort of human interest within the story. And then the final is, are you trying to solve a problem or create an opportunity, right? Make sure that that is very obvious. What is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to cure cancer here, or are you trying to make it so that interns can easily find positions, right? Make sure that they understand what your final value proposition is after you've told the story. Because too often people will just tell the story, and then that'll be it, but you'll be like, so what should I do next, right? So make it obvious as to how it is they can engage with your business. Sometimes you even have to spell it out, like, hey, John got an interview with Cisco, and whoever in the future wants to get interviews, please check out Career Penguin. Right? So sometimes you have to be that clear. But the key thing is that you capture what the user's experience was with your product when you tell the story. Okay? So were they in a really tight situation? Were they about to graduate and they couldn't get an internship, or they didn't have anything to do for the summer, or they had student loans to pay, and then you magically save the day, right? Figure out what it is that the experiences that you want to showcase. And that's what's going to be very interesting to folks, right? Because they're going to be like, oh, I'm that girl or guy. I need to pay off my student loans, or I need to have money for books next semester. I want that internship. So make sure you're capturing the experience that they're going through as they're using your product. This is another reason why we have to keep the customer interviews going and that dialogue between our customers. So a lot of times people will ask, well, should I do this in a landing page or should I do it in a blog post, right? Because sometimes people are really great writers and sometimes they don't want to write. They just want to put something up as an advertisement. Well, I'm going to give you 2 examples and then leave it up to you, but I recommend actually doing both. So in this first case study, I'll show you the example. Really what we were trying to answer, the questions we were trying to answer is, why is Mint even useful? Well, basically it makes your financial life easier. How? Well, it puts all your financial information in one place. And then, what is it doing? Well, it's aggregating all your accounts, and it's creating alerts and budgets, etc. So saying all of this like this, who's going to want to buy this, right? I mean, it answers a lot of questions, but it's not particularly enticing. But if instead we have something like a landing page where we've got navigate the credit card jungle, then people are more receptive, right? So every month companies are out there taking your money. Okay, that's going to capture someone's attention. They're like, yeah, stick it to the man. Banks, utilities, credit cards, you name it. Now imagine a fully automated tool that fights back every day. Sign me up, right? And so here it's very clear. We tell a very, very simple story, still in a landing page format, and then we have a call to action to get them to participate. Okay, and we've captured a value proposition as well. How Mint is going to help you. It's going to find better deals on monthly expenses. It's going to lower monthly debt. It's going to maximize your savings. Does this make sense? Or, yes?
Did you find that most of the people, maybe the early adopters, were people who didn't already use another system to manage their finances?
Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of one of the key things that I'm pushing here is to not try to convince people who are on your competitor's solution to switch over, because they're either going to have some very specific workflow that they've already subscribed to with the competitor's product, or oftentimes they're going to be like, I don't know if this is a credible site, and I've been with this other product for so many years. So there's a change of behavior issue. But a lot of times they're even like unwilling. They're like, I'm happy. Once I feel the pinch, then maybe I'll come. So another example is obviously giving more stories, okay, and then purely in the context of stories. So in these 2 blog posts, we had different titles. One is The Descent into Credit Card Debt, and we gave the example of how someone was just really deep in debt and how we were able to pull them out of it using our products. And then someone else that was able to reach credit card nirvana, right? So reading posts like this, people start to understand and relate to them. Wow, I'm that person in credit card debt, or yeah, I love to get credit card nirvana. How do I do it? Right? And it's not you pushing your product necessarily, because once again, you're doing it in a way, storytelling, that they're open to listening.
Yeah, so this was on your company blog, was it?
Yes.
Okay, and so how do you get people to read that stuff? Because, I mean, if it's a new company, if they have no reason to sign up for a product,
right.
I think they have a less reason to go through all this stuff.
You're absolutely right. So we'll get to that when we talk about SEO. So I'll answer that question. Just sit tight. And if I don't, then ask it again. So another example is Evernote. And here, they didn't do blog posts, but in the landing page itself, it's very clear what it is that they're doing, right? Their value proposition is remember everything. How do you remember everything? Well, you capture, and then you're able to access your data from anywhere, and you can find things quickly, right? So they don't get into like the nitty-gritty details of like well, you have to go and like sync your this and that and click to add this. They don't get into all the features, but they're still pretty high level here, but they're in some ways telling a story of what their product does. So once we have taken the time to tell our story, Hugh Keshev's question, how do we actually get people to read our story? How do they know that we exist, and how do we get them to come? Well, this is where we think about something like search. This is where search is powerful. So the first is search engine optimization. How many of you have already done some SEO work? Okay, only a couple people. That's good. Okay. So this is a long, drawn-out definition, but basically what it's saying is that search engine optimization is organic search, meaning it is not paid search. So when you go to Google AdWords, you are paying to have your articles or your content be placed right next to the organic search results. The organic search results are like when you search for something and they just pop up in that main section. And then the way in which this works is obviously always changing, right? There was Panda, now there's Hummingbird. So Google is always trying to change it to improve the results and find what is relevant. And what is relevant is based on a number of factors, and we'll get into those factors as I talk about it. But I just want you to understand this is organic.
Sorry, what did you say about Panda and Hummingbird? I missed what those were.
So there are two algorithms that...
Oh, those are the algorithm names?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes, that Google came out with. So Panda, they came out with, I believe it was either last year or the year before. And then Hummingbird is like right now, they just released it. And really the focus of doing these releases is because they're trying to improve their results, and they want people to have a good experience. They want for the things that get searched to actually be the right things. So when we talk about SEO, the main thing, kind of like having a storefront, it's all about location. And by location, I mean page rank. So you want to be in that first page of results or as close to possible, because pretty much after that, people aren't going to go through and look through a bunch of different pages in order to find what they're looking for, right? They want to find their information on the first page. So this is why SEO is powerful, because if you can be in that first page of results, then you've instantly gone up in terms of relevancy, and depending on the number of times someone is searching for your particular content, the topic, then you're going to show up more and more often. They're going to basically visit your site, and that's actually going to create a cycle, because the more often people visit your site, assuming they don't bounce, and they actually find the information that's relevant, Google once again boosts up your page rank. So it's important that not only the content on your site be pertinent to whatever the search terms are, but you also have things like site speed, and your site looks decent and is organized well, and we'll get into that. So the key thing before we dig into SEO, because I know a lot of you have been very excited about AdWords, is that with SEO, you actually have to be a bit patient. It's not an overnight strategy. So you can't put a blog post up and then be like, hey, why is nobody visiting my site? And the reason is because it takes Google, the crawlers, a while to find your site and to then put some sort of ranking on it. And usually they are pretty good about indexing it like every, I think, week or 2 weeks, or at least once a month. But the other thing is, like I said before, your customers have to be searching for your product. So if they're not searching, then SEO isn't even going to work, right? If you're going after a user base where they're not searching, then no one's ever going to come to your site, and Google's going to be like, this is an irrelevant company, or this is an irrelevant website. And then the third, which I'll get into, is there are some specific strategies that you have to adhere to even if you're going to get ranked the first time on Google. So leave aside people visiting the site, there are some basic things you need to do so that the crawlers will find you. The other reason that you want to use something like SEO is because it has a longer shelf life. And by that I mean with a tweet, it's like maybe a few minutes. I think at this point it's like starting to become a few seconds. And then with email, most people are going to go back and check their inbox maybe up to 7 days. And then with AdWords, like I've said before, the minute you turn it off, right, you're paying a lot of money, but the minute you turn it off, you're no longer going to show up in the search results. So, you better have a continuous budget in order to do it. And oftentimes people are unwilling to click on the paid advertisements to find that the organic search results are more authentic. And that might be your early adopter as well. So the thing we have to understand is the reason that Google's putting out Panda and Hummingbird and all of these algorithms is because it wants to be the top search engine, right? It doesn't want to lose out to that other company or those other companies. And so in order to be the top search engine, it needs to provide the most clean content. And by clean, their definition means content that is relevant, meaning if they search for a term and somebody comes to your site, they actually look through it. They don't just immediately bounce off of it. The second is that it's timely. It's not a page that's like 20 years old or 10 years old. It's probably a recent website. You're updating it on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And it's accessible. And by accessible, there's kind of two things to accessibility. The first is the site actually, like I said, fast, loads up quickly. But the other is if you do stuff for the hearing impaired, the visually impaired, Google will also, give you some brownie points for that. So that also counts in terms of accessibility. So your job when you're using SEO is to make this little guy, this crawler, your best friend. And the way that you're going to do that is first have some links on your site. And by links, I don't mean links to a bunch of different stuff and people are backlinking to you. I mean that you've got some clear links that aren't just going to nowhere or to a 404 page or something like that. The other is that you've got a clear site structure. So you've got navigation at the top that makes sense, and then navigation throughout your site also makes sense. And if you do have some internal links to other web pages, those are always up to date and they're not dead links. The other is that you've got some clear HTML and CSS. Google still hasn't been able to really crack the code when it comes to JavaScript and Ajax. I know that they're trying to do this, but it's pretty hard, right? Because they're searching pages statically, not dynamically. And then if you have categories, then like if you've got multiple things that people need to come or need to filter themselves out on your site, then put those up there so that people can find the information very easily. They stay on your site, and then Google thinks, hey, this is a relevant site. People are visiting it and staying on for a long time. When I say short URLs, what I mean by that, I don't mean like bit.ly or anything like that. I mean you actually are using words, but you're trying to keep them condensed. I know it's hard to get like a 4-letter domain name. I know how hard that is. But keep things to a minimum. The key thing, though, is that your URL makes sense. Okay, so as close to human words as possible, because a lot of times Google will even parse the URL for keywords. So the things that Google hates, and I should actually add a few more things to this. The first is it hates keyword stuffing. So if you've got a page and the content, whether it's a blog post or whether it's a web page, and there's really nothing in that blog post about getting an intern position or managing your genetics, and you're just stuffing keywords in randomly, but the article is all a bunch of crap, then it's going to think that you're keyword stuffing, and it's going to ding you, meaning it's going to lower your page rank. Or, yes?
What about tagging?
Tagging is okay. Yeah, but the point still remains, even if you do create some tags, you want to make sure that people are searching for those tags and coming to your site for those tags.
So how is keyword stuffing different from tagging?
So keyword stuffing is in the body of the content. People stuff keywords in there. And I guess I should come up with an example for it, but it would be something like, you're talking about art, as in you're stuffing the keyword art every other word or every other sentence, but you're really not even talking about an article about art. You're just hoping to drive traffic to that site. Okay? So you want to make sure that the content actually makes sense when you're delivering it.
Why is tagging less of an issue?
So I don't think Google actually considers tagging as much as it considers keywords within the context. I think it certainly uses tagging, but I don't think it, and I'm sorry, I don't have all the details on this, but I think tagging is more used for people to find information easily on your site. Like when you tag something or you put it into a category, like on a blog, then they can easily search for the information there. I don't know if Google's actually using that in its algorithm. The other is, yes?
Or
do you have
if you wanted Google to see your tags, you can put them in a keyword meta tag.
Okay, yes, we'll get into that. You're talking about alt tags and stuff like that. Yeah, we'll get into that as well, yes. The other is duplicate content. So let's say you have a blog post and then someone says, hey, really love that blog post. We want to put it on our site. Do not let them copy and paste your blog post onto their site. Because Google will essentially think that you're a content farm or something like that, and it will ding you for duplicate content. Instead, tell them, hey, let's rewrite the first paragraph or write a summary and then link back to our site. That's okay, but don't reuse the exact same content on 2 different sites. Any other questions on the dings? Okay. So the other thing, which I didn't put on here, is with the advent of Hummingbird, what Google is trying to do is it's trying to move in this direction of finding the sites that have actually taken the time to generate content that is meaningful to human beings, right? Not these content farms that are just cranking out a bunch of gobbledygook. And it wants to reward those. So if you want to avoid these things, you want to have your content be as authentic as possible and as appealing to a human being as possible. So that's the direction it's trying to move in. So even doing things like adding keywords that you think might be relevant, might still be a useful tactic, but try to keep your content, like I said, as actually enticing to people as possible, and worry less about the keywords. So the other, of course, you probably all know that the crawler cannot crawl logins. It's only going to get up to your public site. So if you've got an application that people are going to log into, it's not going to see that, but it'll see your landing site, your landing pages. So if you want to check that whether or not you've been indexed, you can do a Google search on your company's URL or name, and then you'll see when the last time is that it cached your site. So it'll say something like 2 hours ago. Okay. So in order to become crawl-worthy, remember I said you have to make sure that you have some good structure. So this is the basic HTML structure that you're going to want. You're going to want to make sure that all the headlines and the titles are optimized. Sometimes you even want to make sure that in there you put the keywords, like Alex mentioned. And then within the, well, actually it's not here. Okay, it's in another page. Within the alt tag, that's where you can put keywords. So you're allowed to put keywords in this alt tag, especially for images. But like I said before, bad structure is having like a bunch of numbers and letters. Good structure is a human-readable URL with categories or actual words. And then the other thing that people don't realize that really improves search rankings is to have images be indexed. Okay, because Google obviously also searches for images, right? And one of the things that I see a lot of times that people do is they'll put up all these amazing images, and they'll all just be like these gobbledygook, like IMG_123. It's like, what the hell does that mean, right? So make sure that your images, if you're going to have images on your site, that the names of the pictures actually are either keywords or exactly what it is that you're talking about. So if it's intern at Duke, then put that on there, or if it's like a particular student and you want to showcase them, then that's fine. And then make sure if you want, you can put all keywords in the alt tags. So the other thing that I see that oftentimes people forget is when they do something like a guest post or a press piece, right? If you're in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, a lot of these times these people don't bother to link back to your site when it's actually going to give you a lot of SEO juice. So make sure if you write a blog post or if somebody writes a blog post about you or anything, any content online, that there is some sort of link back to your company or back to your bio or profile or something like that. Okay, so when we talk about content marketing, the first groan I hear is, well, I don't really know how to write, and I oftentimes get stuck in blogger's block. So I'm going to give you some strategies to get over that. Now, the key thing is obviously to be observant and to turn any sort of conversations you have, whether it's with a customer, whether it's something you did internally in your company to build a new feature, or put anything that you're doing, right? Turn that into a post. It doesn't have to be this novel that you're writing or some sort of term paper or your lab report, right? It can be a fun thing, and that's what people want to read anyways in a blog post. The other thing, like I said before, is to showcase people. Now, the reason you want to showcase people is because people love to showcase themselves, right? So if you do a case study on a customer, guess what they're going to do? They're going to be like, hey, look at this company. They just like showcased me for being an intern. I got this job. Look, Mom. And then Mom's going to go and be like, look, my son got a job using Career Penguin. And then she's going to tell everybody about it. And then some other kid's going to be like, well, I didn't get a job. Well, I'm going to go check out this site too, right? So the reason that we showcase customers is because it gives them a little bit of an ego boost. And at the same time, they're willing to spread the word about themselves. This is another reason why we want to, in particular, showcase experts. Even if the expert has not necessarily done an interview, but you want to write about them, that's okay, as long as it's not libelous or slanderous. But if the expert finds it, then they're going to be like, hey, that's cool. I remember a few years ago I wrote some book review, and I didn't even realize on my blog, and then the author reached out to me and said, hey, thanks for writing a book review on this, because it was pretty glowing. But I did call out that he didn't interview any women engineers. And so he was like, yeah, I'm really sorry, I didn't have time. So he felt a little bit bad about it. Then was willing to send over the, I guess, sample interviews that he had done, but just didn't get to add in the book. So you can certainly showcase experts. If you can get an interview with them, that's even better, because then they'll go out and showcase themselves. Or if you just write about them, that's cool too. Because the thing is that people will be searching for those experts, and as they're searching, your blog post will also show up, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you've done an interview with them. Other people might be searching for content on this person. So the other thing to do is to link to sites that you think are relevant, okay? Because hopefully other people that are savvy will be checking for referral traffic. And if you're sending them a lot of traffic, or even just a little bit, they'll be like, I wonder who this company is. Let me refer back to them, right? So putting something like Duke EDU on there could be potentially beneficial, because a lot of people are searching that site, and then you'll create a backlink to yourself. So in order to kind of dig in through all the links, there is a great tool that I use called Open Site Explorer. And I'll leave it up to you guys to go through the exercise of checking it out. But the reason I think it's a great tool is because it lets you quickly see who's already linking to you that you might not know about. Right? And then you could possibly reach out to them and be like, hey, thanks for sending us traffic. How about we do a blog post or something like that. The other thing is it helps you search for broken links, right? And then you can hopefully get rid of those and boost your rankings. And then the other is to see who's linking to competitors. And by that I mean you can go to your competitor site and see who's linking to them. And then possibly ask them, why are you linking to these competitors, especially if they're an expert or an influencer. Now, I'm sure a number of you have used Google Keyword Tool. Who hasn't used Google Keyword Tool? Okay, so a few people. That's okay. It's not a big deal. So in your lab exercise, you will be using Google Keyword Tool. The key thing to keep in mind as you're using the tool, and they kind of change it around a lot, but the one thing that you want to keep track of is the search terms based on volume. Okay, so Google does this thing where there will be a lot of searches, and oftentimes, if there are a lot, and by lot I mean over 10,000, possibly 100,000 or a million, right? So a lot of times, those that have very high volume are also ones that are very competitive. And by competitive, I'm talking about Google AdWords here, but it can also mean that there's a lot of search SEO content available as well. So what you want to do is understand what those common terms are, the ones that have a lot of volume, but then take a look at the medium competition terms. Because with the medium competition terms, a lot of times they are called long-tail keywords that you wouldn't necessarily think people are searching for, right? So everybody might be searching for something like internships. Okay, sorry to use you guys as an example, but it's like sitting there. So everyone might be searching for internships, right? But people might not be searching for how to get an internship junior year, right? That's a long tail keyword. And oftentimes that's how people actually search, right? I mean, sometimes they just search for the immediate keyword, but when they do that, they're going to get just a lot of lists and there's going to be a lot of competition. But if you can get sort of closer to the intention, then it's more likely that yours is going to rank higher for that long tail. We'll also talk about Google Analytics, but the key things that I want you to think about before you do your lab are, how are you keeping track of your links, what the referral traffic is that's coming to your site, and then if there's any conversions. But to have conversions, you've got to set up goals. So we'll talk about that in the lab as well. Okay. So if you want to improve your search rankings, the first thing you're going to want to do is do an SEO audit of your entire site. So most of you have fairly new sites, so there's not really a huge need to go in and do an audit at this point. But if your site's been around for a while, then it's very likely you're going to have broken links. Or if you've done a pivot where the user segment or the value proposition no longer makes sense and you think you've cleaned all of that up, you want to go back and get rid of some of that content. You might also want to go in and replace search terms with long-tail search terms. And then the other thing that you might do, depending on the type of product or business that you have, is you might actually want to submit to some local directories. And the best example I can give is a Yelp, but there might be something even very specific to Durham. And that's if you think people are going to be searching based off of location for your product. Because Google does, I forgot to mention this, but Google does also factor in location into its search results. So a lot of times that's a relevant piece of information, right? So if you're searching for cafes, it's not going to give you the most visited cafe. It's going to give you the most visited cafe in your city, town, region, whatever. Okay? All right, so next we're going to talk about email. So, we all probably hate email at this point, and we think it sucks, and we think it's probably not a great marketing tool because we have inbox clutter. We might think that there's who the hell is opening their emails, and there's probably a really high bounce rate. Even if we get an email address, it's very unlikely that it's going to be a legitimate one. And then, of course, we need to have a really big list in order for it to make an impact. So, why bother with email? Well, the truth is that email is the most targeted communication channel. And if you don't believe that, $2.1 billion is being spent on email marketing. So why would people be spending that much money if it wasn't working, right? The key thing that people oftentimes fail to understand when they do email marketing is that everything matters in an email. So delivery time matters. Okay, if you're sending out an email on a Sunday evening when people might not be checking their emails, it's probably not going to be read, right? Or if you include a subject line that's either doesn't make sense or is maybe even too salesy, then they're not going to open it. And then, of course, within the message itself, if you get them to open it, if there's too much content or, once again, a landing page, it's not structured or it doesn't make sense or it's irrelevant, then they're going to be spam. So you have to think about all of these things before you send an email. And if you still don't believe me, you still don't think it's important, well, there's a number of companies that have basically grown purely through email as their initial marketing channel, not even anything else. With Guild Group, they certainly started off with a 6,000-person email list and grew from there. I'm sure a number of you know that Groupon started off primarily through email. And then same thing with Daily Handy and Zappos. So the key thing with building up your list is obviously you've got to do this opt-in policy. And now a lot of companies are doing what's called double opt-in, where not only does the subscriber have to opt in on the site, but then they're going to get an email and they're going to have to click on a link and then they're going to be on your subscription list. So you've got to have something compelling in order to get them to subscribe to you. And then, of course, a lot of times people will sign up for an email, and then you don't send them an email consistently, and you send something 6 months later, they're going to be who the hell is this company? Why did I sign up for them? Right? And then the other thing that people oftentimes fail to do is that they don't segment, right? They just send out an email blast that's hey, sign up for our product, but you've already signed up for the product, so why would I get this email, right? So think about how you can segment your lists so that you've got your paid customers versus your not paid customers. You've got people that are prospects, versus actual customers. And then from there, you can send more targeted messages. The other thing, and when we get into analytics, we'll dig into this a little bit more, is we want to keep track of who has most frequently opened an email. And a lot of the tools will give you that. Sometimes, once again, you're doing location like Google, so you need to segment your list even further into a certain location, like, hey, I'm going to be in Nebraska, so let's figure out all the students in Nebraska and send them an email so that they'll come to see my talk. Right? It's a great way to get them and very, very targeted. Or if you're segmenting based on particular characteristics of the person, right? The particular user segments. So, there's basically 3 types of email campaigns that we want to send out. There's the drip campaign. I'm sure a number of you have gotten this from me. It's the weekly email that I send out, right? And within that, you know, what am I trying to do? I'm just trying to stay relevant in your life. I'm trying to send an email every week saying, hey, look, I exist, right? Oh, and here's some information or strategies if you think it's relevant. But really, it's to stay top of mind in people's minds. The other is a very sales email where all they do in it is not any sort of value addition or creation, but it's just buy this right now, right? That's what Groupon does. And then the third is a newsletter. And the reason that these, I would say, are a little bit different is, a little bit the same is you can have a drip campaign that is a newsletter, or if you do something like, thanks for signing up for our product, and you put people on a 2-week trial, then you have what's known as an autoresponder. So that means you've already scheduled out all the emails, and every day they're going to get an email saying, hey, here's how to set up, here's how to sign up for our product, or here's a new feature, or here's a way to get in touch with us. Okay, so that way, if you feel like a lot of people are just signing up to your site and immediately dropping off, using an autoresponder is going to get them to take some action on a daily basis. It's not guaranteed, obviously, because some people will be like, spam, but most people will kind of stick through. So when you're doing something like a drip campaign, the key thing, like I said before, is to have them either sign up, do like a sign-up workflow where they're on something like a 2-week trial and you're explaining to them all the different pieces of what it is that you have to offer. Or if you don't have a product built yet, right, and you just want to make sure that people remember you, then do something like share your expertise, which is sort of what I do, right, is I don't have anything really to sell all the time. I'm just trying to stay top of mind. Or if you're doing something like, hey, we're going to have this really cool launch event, include that in an ongoing campaign so that people know about it. But the key thing is that you're trying to stay engaged with your customers, right? You're trying to stay relevant in their minds. Whether or not you're selling something, whether or not they're buying something, they're at least remembering that you exist. Now, the key thing I will emphasize, and a lot of people are like, well, you're probably going to get a lot of unsubscribes. You're going to get unsubscribes no matter what you do. So you might as well figure out who the people are that are really engaged and continue to stay top of mind in their heads. And to do that, you've got to be consistent. So you've got to figure out, am I going to put out an email every week, or am I going to put out an email every month? Pick whatever frequency you want, but pick something, and then stick to that. And that way, you will eventually start to develop that mind share. So, easiest way, create a list, right? Start off by figuring out what emails that you do have from folks or getting people to sign up to a list. If you've got a landing page, like I showed you with Mint, figure out your frequency, and then figure out what your messages are going to be throughout all of your campaigns. So this is something you're going to have to do in your lab. And then, schedule it out, and then at the very end of the month, take a look at your analytics. Don't look at it at every campaign, because it's going to be a waste of time. Look at it kind of holistically so that you see, because a lot of times that first email you send out, everyone's going to be like, oh, I didn't sign up for this, and they're going to unsubscribe. But you'll have a better sense of who's sticking through and is continuing to read if you review the stats at the very end. So we talked about this a little bit as well, the 2-week trial, but once again, tell people how do you get set up, what are some of the benefits or the features of using your product, do you have customer support, make sure you reiterate the value proposition of what it is that you're selling, and then at the very end of something like an autoresponder, make sure you have a close. Be like, hey, thanks for participating in the 2-week trial, so now it's time to whip out that credit card, And sometimes you have to hit people over the head with that, right? You can't just assume that they're going to use your product. So make sure you've got something in there that makes it very clear that it's now time to buy. Or one of the things that I saw people do very effectively, especially in these trials, is to say something like, if you act now, then we will give you some sort of special pricing, right? But to only limit it to people that are on the trial. And we'll get into that when we talk about pricing. So the more personalized the message you can send in your emails, whether it's a sales email or whether it's a newsletter or one of these autoresponders, doesn't matter, right? But the more personalized you can get, the better. The more likely people are going to be to stick around because they see value in what you're doing. Or they're getting some value out of it. So think about, sending an email if they just signed up for the list, right? Thanks for signing up. Here's like our first 5 tips on how to get an internship. And then if you want to really get an internship, come talk to us or whatever it is that your product is going to do, right? But make sure you start to add some value from that first interaction. Or if they've already bought something, right? Hey, thanks for doing my one-on-one tutorial. Here's a get started guide on contacting colleges or whatever, right? So continue that conversation. The key thing is to keep all the emails pretty short, unless it's one of those long newsletters like mine. And then to have the action item, right? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to get them to buy something? Are you trying to get them to come to an event? Are you trying to get them to forward this email to a friend? Are you trying to get them to unsubscribe, right? Figure out what that action is and have them do that in the email. Okay, so why are we doing all this today? It seems like a lot of work. Sitting here writing emails and copy and all this stuff. We're trying to attract early adopters, right? So it's not enough to just go out there and get them. We've got to keep them interested. We've got to keep them knowing about us. We've got to keep the buzz going. So the other thing I will say is don't feel like, wow, okay, so I have to write blog posts, and then I have to write landing pages or create landing pages, and then I also have to write emails, okay? A lot of times you can reuse the same content over and over again, okay, in a number of places. So don't feel like it all has to be new stuff all the time. It's certainly okay to take a blog post and put it into an email campaign or vice versa, right? Because Google isn't going to know that, right? It's not going to look at your emails. Well, it is, but it's not going to ding you for it in SEO. Okay, so some common things are use a snippet of an email or of a blog post in an email. Save yourself some time. Like I said, email can turn into a blog post, or you can tweet about this, and we'll get into that when we talk about social media, which is next. Okay, so the one key thing I will say is if you decide to go down the path of using social media, then your audience better be social. And I don't mean like, they're some hermit living in the world. I'm saying, that they are hearing about products like yours in a social context, right? Or that they're actually using these social media tools, right? So if they're not using Twitter, if they're not using Facebook, if they're not using any of these things or Pinterest, then don't bother, right? It's just going to be a waste of your time. And remember, the most important thing is that you find the channel that connects with the customer. Now, if they are social, then great. You can use it to your advantage. And I think most of you are doing things that people would find out about socially. But like I said before, it comes back to these mental models. So you're going to want to go back and think about the user's persona. Are they hanging out on Facebook? Or are they hanging out on Twitter? Or are they hanging out on something else? And the reason I say that is because there is this sort of classic debate between awareness versus intent. Does anybody know what I mean by this? Has anybody heard of this debate? Okay, so when somebody is searching, they have an intention of, I'm actively looking for something, I'm possibly going to purchase it after I find it, or I'm at least in the mood to make a decision. Versus, I'm stalking somebody on Facebook or reading through my tweets. Oh, look, there's something for internships. Whatever. They don't really care, right? So they might see, oh, there was a penguin that flashed by, but okay, whatever. You're just building awareness, right? So a lot of times you have to think about, does it make sense to actually put effort into some of these social media tools if you're not 100% sure that people are going to be looking at those ads, right? Or you might have to do something that's a little bit more in line, meaning, hey, we're going to use Facebook to spread the word about our product, but we're not going to put any ads on it. Okay? So we're going to kind of engage with that social aspect. So that's the difference between awareness and intent. And it's certainly okay to build awareness. A lot of times people need 70 touch points before they actually decide to make a decision, or they're like, oh yes, now I know what this company is or what they do. Go ahead, please. The other thing when you're using something like social is you actually have to put some time into building an audience. So it's not enough to just hope that people will listen to you on Twitter or Facebook or any of these other channels. You actually have to take the time to build up an audience. And so the way to do that is obviously to start by trying to follow a diverse set. Sometimes this set will include a lot of your user segments or experts or influencers that we've talked about before. And then the other is to also follow who it is they're sharing information with. Okay? A lot of times that makes it really easy for you to pick followers or to follow their followers. And now, unlike these other channels like search and email, social media is pretty time-consuming because you actually have to have conversations. You can't just put a bunch of posts up there and then hope that somebody engages with you. You actively have to go out there and try to converse with people. But the key thing that you're trying to do is you're trying to take those conversations offline, meaning you're trying to find the early adopters on these platforms and then trying to schedule some of their time to check out your product or have an interview or spread the word about you. So in order to do that, you really have to take the time to understand the audience once you have built it up. Okay? Because sometimes you'll find that you've built an audience and it's a great audience, but they're not really going to buy anything from you or they're not going to spread the word. So you probably need to go back and rethink the people that you followed. But before you do that, take some time to test whether or not this is an audience that you can sell to. So I just want to share a quick story for myself. And that's that when I started Femgineer, one of the things that I did is I actually got a lot of sales just through Twitter. But I was pretty consistent about how I did it. So I would talk about a student who had taken one of my courses and how they benefited, and then I would create a tweet about it and put it out there and then put something like, hey, sign up in the next 2 weeks to take this course. And so from that, I was able to gauge that there were a number of Twitter followers who were open to taking my course, but the value add that I was doing all through it is I was showcasing people who had benefited, or I was talking about what they were going to learn in the course, or I was also giving them some idea of where they would be towards the end of the course. And so with that, they didn't feel like, oh, she's being salesy. They kind of understood what it is that Femgineer does and whether or not they wanted to engage. So we're going to talk about analytics in another lecture, but we're going to be able to gauge whether or not a channel is effective based off of analytics. So I hope you've been starting to do some reading in the Lean Analytics book, because it will help when we get to the analytics lecture. But this will help us to determine whether or not we want to turn off certain channels that are just not giving us anything. But like I said before, we might uncover other channels that we want to pursue. So just because I've listed some of the channels on here doesn't mean that these are the only channels to pursue. You might do more. These are, remember, the ones that are the scrappiest.